There are structures that the whole world recognizes. Sometimes one glance is enough to understand where you are. A tall metal construction reaching for the sky. Its silhouette can be seen from different corners of the city, above the bridges of the Seine, the Louvre, and Montmartre. During the day, it rises above the city, and at night, it lights up with thousands of lights. The Eiffel Tower. Today, it seems eternal, a symbol of Paris, a symbol of France. It has become a silent witness to countless declarations of love. Every year, millions of people come here to see it with their own eyes. But few know that once Paris hated this tower. Many considered it an eyesore, an iron monster that was destroying the beauty of the city. Its appearance became a real war between engineers and artists. And yet, despite the protests, despite the mockery, it was built. Let's go back to Paris at the end of the 19th century. A city of artists, poets, and endless boulevards. The cobblestones echo with the wheels of elegant carriages. In the evenings, the streets are lit by the soft glow of gas lamps. From cafes come conversations about literature, art, and politics. Above the rooftops of the city rise only the stone towers of churches, ancient spires that for centuries defined the skyline of Paris. The tallest buildings at that time barely reached 100 meters, and no one, literally no one, could imagine that very soon a structure almost 3 times taller would appear above this city. But something even more unbelievable was this. This tower was not going to be built of stone or marble, but of iron, cold industrial metal, a material considered too crude for architecture. A material that until then had been used mainly for bridges, railways, and factories. The project was conceived as the symbol of the 1889 World's Fair, a grand event that France was organizing to mark the centenary of the French Revolution. For the country, it was an opportunity to show the world its greatness, its innovative spirit, and its technological superiority. They needed to create something the world had never seen before. And it was at this very moment, in the heart of Paris, that an idea appeared which would change the city forever. It belonged to an engineer named Gustave Eiffel, but the idea of the tower didn't come immediately. When France began preparing for the World's Fair, the government announced a competition. Architects and engineers were asked to submit a project that would become the main symbol of the future exhibition. Hundreds of ideas were submitted. Some proposed huge columns. Others suggested giant arches or monuments. But one project looked completely different. It was a metal tower more than 300 meters tall. For the end of the 19th century, this sounded almost fantastical. No structure on Earth had ever risen that high. Some called it insane. Such a construction simply won't withstand the wind, they said. An iron tower of that height will collapse at the first strong storm. This is not architecture, it's an industrial chimney in the middle of Paris. And almost no one remembered one important thing. Not long before, Eiffel had helped create the internal metal framework for the famous Statue of Liberty in New York. A structure that had to withstand strong ocean winds and support the enormous weight of the copper statue. But now, when it came to a tower over 300 meters tall, many were once again convinced it was impossible. When the project was presented to the Commission, it made a strong impression. And soon this bold idea was chosen as the main symbol of the future exhibition. But at that moment, Eiffel had no idea what trials lay ahead of him. The tower project was approved, but ahead was a task that seemed almost impossible. There was very little time left. Until the opening of the 1889 World's Fair, the event the whole of France was preparing for, there were just over 2 years left. It was a real race against time. The tower not only had to be designed, it had to be manufactured, delivered, and assembled, all in just a few years. For a project of this scale, it seemed almost madness. But Eiffel had one secret, a construction method that allowed the giant tower to be assembled faster than anyone could imagine. But more on that later. In January 1887, on the Champ de Mars, next to the Seine River, the first works began. Early in the morning, a light mist rose over the water, and the silence of Paris was broken by the strikes of picks and shovels. Workers began digging the foundation for the future giant. The tower was to stand on 4 huge supports. Each of them had to withstand thousands of tons of metal and the strongest winds, which at 300 meters could be devastating. 2 supports were placed on solid stone foundations, but the other 2 were closer to the river, where the soil was soft and unstable. And here a serious question arose. How can you build a giant tower on soft ground next to water? Any mistake could lead to catastrophe. The foundation could sink and the entire structure could lean. The engineers had to use a complex technology. Huge metal caissons were lowered deep underground to strengthen the foundation. Workers descended into these giant metal chambers. Water was pumped out, and compressed air was pumped in. Only this way could they reach the solid layer of soil beneath the soft ground. But the foundation was only the beginning. After the foundation was completed, only a year and a half remained until the opening of the exhibition. Time was running out, catastrophically. But Eiffel had an important secret. He understood that it was impossible to build such a tower in such a short time using ordinary methods. That's why almost all the work was done in advance. At the factories, engineers manufactured thousands of metal parts for the future structure. Each of them was precisely calculated. Each beam was numbered. Every hole for the rivets was prepared in advance. When the parts were delivered to the construction site, all the workers had to do was connect them, like a huge metal construction set. It was this method that allowed the tower to be built much faster than anyone expected. In total, the structure was to consist of more than 18,000 metal elements, connected by 2.5 million rivets. When the parts arrived at the site, they were lifted by steam cranes and fixed at height. Gradually, huge metal arches began to rise above Paris, first at 50 meters, then at 100. Paris watched the construction almost like a spectacle. Every day, residents came to the Champ de Mars to see how the tower was growing. Working at such a height seemed insanely risky and unsafe. Workers moved along metal beams with almost no safety equipment, balancing over the void. Far below them lay the city. Sometimes the wind would sway the metal structures. It seemed that such construction would inevitably lead to tragedies. But here the story takes an unexpected turn. During the entire construction of the Eiffel Tower, only one fatal accident was officially recorded, and even that happened after the construction was completed. For comparison, during the construction of the Brooklyn Bridge, about 27 workers died. While the metal giant slowly rose above Paris, tension was growing in the city. Not everyone was ready to accept the new tower. For many residents of Paris, it seemed like a real insult. Especially strongly opposed to the project were artists, writers, and architects. In 1887, a group of prominent cultural figures published an open letter of protest. It was signed by about 300 representatives of the Parisian intelligentsia. Among them was the famous writer Guy de Maupassant, as well as the playwright, son of Alexandre Dumas. In their manifesto, they warned that Paris was threatened by the appearance of a giant black tower that will loom over the city and overshadow all its monuments. They called it an iron monster, a hideous iron carcass, a skeleton of a smokestack. In their opinion, the tower would destroy the harmony of Paris, a city that for centuries had been considered the capital of beauty and art. But Gustave Eiffel was not going to retreat. He began a real information battle. Eiffel responded to critics in newspapers, published engineering calculations, and explained why the tower would withstand even the strongest winds. But even he didn't yet know what trials awaited him ahead. If Paris already hated his tower so much now, what would happen when it rose above the entire city? March 31st, 1889. After more than 2 years of intense work, construction was completed. The metal giant rose above Paris to a height of 312 meters. It was the tallest structure that man had ever created. For the first time in history, a metal construction surpassed in height all buildings and monuments in the world. The tower even surpassed the famous Washington Monument, which until then had been considered the tallest structure on the planet. But the most symbolic moment came on the day when its creator, engineer Gustave Eiffel, climbed to the top of the tower and raised the French flag there. At that moment it became clear the impossible had become reality. The tower was completed. But the real triumph was still ahead. On May 6, 1889, the World's Fair opened in Paris. People from all over the world began arriving in the city. Travelers from Europe, guests from America, visitors from Japan and India. Millions of people wanted to see the main wonder of the exhibition, the Eiffel Tower. In the evenings, the Champ de Mars turned into a sea of lights. People strolled between the exhibition pavilions, and above it all rose the new tower, illuminated by hundreds of lamps. When visitors first approached it, many stopped in amazement. Some were stunned by its size. Others called it a metal miracle. But no one remained indifferent. Climbing the tower became a real adventure. Elevators slowly carried people higher and higher, first to the first level, then to the second, and finally to the very top. But lifting people to such a height was not an easy task. The tower's elevators became a separate engineering marvel. They had to move not strictly vertically, but along the curved supports of the structure. For this, engineers developed a complex system of hydraulic lifts. For visitors of that time, the ride in the elevator itself became a real adventure. From here, Paris opened up in a completely different way. The city lay below like a huge map. The Seine wound through it like a silver ribbon. The rooftops of houses stretched into the distance to the very horizon. For people of the 19th century, this was an incredible feeling. No one had ever seen the world from such a height before. And at that moment, it became clear. France had built not just a tower, it had built a symbol of a new era. But what was even more surprising, the tower that amazed the whole world was not supposed to exist for long at all. Despite the incredible success of the World's Fair, the fate of the tower remained uncertain. Many thought it would become an eternal symbol of Paris, but in reality, its story could have ended very quickly. According to the original agreement, the tower was supposed to stand for only 20 years. After 1909, it was planned to be dismantled. The metal giant that had amazed the world could disappear as suddenly as it had appeared. But its creator had a different plan. Engineer Gustav Eiffel understood if the tower proved useful, no one would be able to tear it down. So scientific instruments began to be installed at the top of the tower. Meteorological observations were carried out there. The force of the wind at great heights was studied. The first aerodynamic experiments were conducted. The tower gradually turned into a real laboratory above Paris. But soon it would discover a completely new role, a role that would change its fate forever. The beginning of the 20th century was changing the world. Europe was moving forward rapidly. Cities were growing. Technologies were developing. New inventions were changing people's everyday lives. But at the same time, tension was growing across the continent. In 1914, Europe was drawn into the First World War. France became one of the main countries involved in this war. And it was then that the Eiffel Tower unexpectedly received a new role. The height of the structure turned out to be ideal for radio communication. Powerful transmitters were installed at the top of the tower. With their help, the French military could send and receive signals over vast distances. The tower, which had once seemed useless and a temporary structure, now became an important part of the country's defense. In 1939, Europe once again stood on the brink of a great war. The Second World War began. A few months later, German troops rapidly advanced through France. In the summer of 1940, they entered Paris. Columns of soldiers and military equipment moved along the empty boulevards. The city that had once been called the capital of light and culture found itself under the control of Nazi Germany. Swastika flags appeared above many buildings. But above Paris still rose the Eiffel Tower, a silent iron giant, watching as history once again changed the fate of the city. And it was during these days that one of the most famous stories connected with the tower took place. When the leader of Nazi Germany, Adolf Hitler, arrived in Paris, he wanted to climb to the top of the tower. But French workers had cut the elevator cables in advance. If he wanted to go up, he would have had to climb more than 1,700 steps on foot. They say he never went up. Later, a phrase spread around the world. Hitler conquered France, but he could never conquer the Eiffel Tower. And only in August 1944 was the city liberated. When the French flag was raised over the tower again, for many residents it became a symbol of the return of freedom. A structure that was once considered a temporary experiment proved to be stronger than time. And over time it became clear this was no longer just an engineering structure. It was a symbol of Paris, and a symbol of human courage to dream of the impossible. After the war, the world began to change. Europe was recovering. Cities were coming back to life. But above Paris, the Eiffel Tower still rose, a structure that almost no one had once believed in. A tower that had been called a monster. A tower that had been planned to be dismantled. Today, more than 7 million people visit the tower every year. Some climb to the top. Others simply stand at its base and look up. But almost everyone feels the same thing. Standing before this iron giant, you understand. Sometimes the craziest ideas turn out to be the greatest.